Well, I have an amazing day today because this is an opportunity for me to chat with my mentor, friend, colleague, Kathleen Diamond, who is also one of the founding commissioners of CCHI. But Kathleen is so many more things than her partnership with CCHI and her support for us, that I just am dying for the opportunity to talk to you. And on this lovely afternoon, let's grab our coffee and just talk. Let's start from the very beginning. How did you start your career in the language space? What are your main milestones? Because I know many of you many do not know you as well as I do.
Well, thank you so much, Natalya. You know that it's always an honor to be chosen by you to be interviewed. You're a great interviewer, and I thank you for seeing me as a mentor. I certainly see you as a protege. So
thank you. And just I definitely value that. And I wondered when I was just entering this field, like, how do you become a protege? How do you find a mentor? And what I learned is you work with people, you interact with them, you build a relationship, and at one moment you realize, like, oh, I've learned so much from this other person that person is my mentor. So yeah. It's not something that like announcing, like, or emailing you, Kathleen, could you be my mentor, please? I don't believe in that. I think it builds up to that moment when you both are on this, relationship that you understand how you support each other. So thank you for that.
Well, I agree, because if you had asked me, I would have said, of course not. I have no time for you. No time. So to begin to answer your question, one of these days I'm going to seriously sit down and try to write my story, because my story really begins with my parents, my 100% Anglo-Saxon, Anglophone parents. My father came from upstate New York, Rochester, New York, and my mother from a small town in upstate Indiana, Plymouth, Indiana. And they met in a small college on the Ohio River, and they fell in love and they married. And World War II came, and Daddy had to go overseas. And he was a liberator in World War II. And he survived, and he came home. And he said to my mother, I really like airplanes. And my mother said, well, that's just fine. But whatever you're thinking about doing with those airplanes, it's going to be on the ground now. So my father, after he came back and finished his college, he finished up at the University of Indiana, and in 1946. And he then took a job with Pan American World Airways. At the time, this was sort of the beginning of amazing commercial aviation. And Pan Am was the ultra plus none, I mean, just absolutely the airplane that you wanted to fly on and be on. And my father took a job, and he was stationed in Miami, Florida. And I was born in Miami, Florida in June of 1947. It was a very good year. Good year in the vineyards too, Natalya.
That's for my next question, or some other questions that down the road. Yep.
Exactly. So it was all very nice in Miami, Florida, because I don't remember it. But I was born in June, and my parents felt that I needed to meet some of the grandparents up north. And so my mother took a flight on Eastern with me when I was only about 6 weeks. And I have the air ticket. I have the ticket.
Wow.
Showing this little air passage for us, my mother and I, to go from Miami to Plymouth, Indiana, Chicago, and then down to Plymouth, so I could meet my McKesson grandparents. And that was in November. And within a very short period of time, we were transferred to the Republic of Panama. So I begin my relationship with language as an infant. I don't have an infant memory of it, because it was always, I guess they consider me to be bilingual at birth, basically. And we lived in Republic of Panama. We then moved all throughout the Caribbean and down through the Latin American cone. So I lived in 7 different countries before I was 7. Mostly Spanish speaking, but not so easy. Also English, very English, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados. These were colonies yet still of England. And so it was the English system. So I spoke Spanish, I spoke English. I didn't speak or write anything particularly well, but that's kind of who I was. And I finished up the 6th grade in Venezuela. And I thought, oh, this is good, I'm done. Because my friends were going to the Monte, and I thought, well, me too. And my parents said, no, we do it a little differently. we continue our schooling. So they made a good decision to send me to Barbados because it was closer than sending me to the States. And I was in a boarding school, a British boarding school. And in that boarding school, British, terribly British, all of the school mistresses had come from Europe, including the French teacher. And they placed no value on the Spanish. All British girls learn French. You have to study French. So in studying French. And Natalya, we were on the island of Barbados, which is beautiful all year round. And this French teacher would sit in front of the classroom and she'd say, brouillard. Répétez. Brouillard. And I'm 13 years old and I'm thinking, this is the oddest thing. I don't even know what this brouillard means. So I raised my hand and asked the question, and she said, it means mist, fog. I was 13 and I said, but madame, we need to learn the word for sun.
That's right. Where would we see that mist of yours?
So in my 13-year-old brain that was already mixed up with 2 languages, I was being introduced to a third, and I was being introduced to it in an academic way. And I wanted it to be useful. And at 13, I could not have imagined the journey I've now taken that I, at this age and stage, I can talk to you about in its fullest. But it made me want to use language appropriately, use-oriented language instruction. So that was my beginning. But I didn't speak French. I had to study it, and I didn't get to really study it until I did my junior year abroad, and then came back to the University of Florida. And I studied for and received my master's degree in French literature, 16th century. And I was ready to conquer the world. But of course, the world was not at all interested in me or my master's degree or my content or my knowledge or anything. So it was a hard time coming out of university with a language degree. So I was able to, find some private students and, fiddle around. And then I started having my family, and that kept me nice and busy. And so I wasn't too worried about my career, but I knew that I was going to have to think about it at some point. And sure enough, I thought, well, I'm going to have to teach. What else, right? So I got a couple of jobs teaching. It wasn't what I wanted, Natalya. I had much more, I don't know, in me. By this time, I'm in my 20s, hey, I got experience.
That's right. You already know it.
The world better make room for me. So it was in the late 1970s, 79, where I had an awakening, and it had to do with going downtown. This was in the Washington, D.C. area, and discovering that the only option for me to teach outside of the academic world was in a commercial language school, and that would have been Berlitz. Mm-hmm. Just like in those days, everybody knew Pan American World Airways, Pan Am. People knew Berlitz. These were
That's right.
American corporations that were well known. So I went and applied, and heaven's sakes, the offer was, it's so exciting. You can teach 3 languages. Come on board. And I said, fine. And you will compensate me. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. $4.80 an hour. Mm-hmm. And so I I left, I remember this part so clearly, Natalya, and it's funny how you don't know exactly how or when these key things happen, but some moments you remember. Remember walking out and seeing in a brochure that this company Berlitz was going to charge the student $25 an hour. And my non-mathematical but very intelligent brain said, I wonder what happens to the money between my 480 and the 25. And I went home that night and I had dinner with my family. I think I poured myself a nice cognac. And I said, you know, I'm going to start my own business.
That's right. If the world is not ready to offer you anything, you need to create something for the world and teach them how to use it. Absolutely.
It was just, I mean, and there was silence at my family's table, the silence, because my father had been a corporate person. I mean, there was nothing in my background, but there was good fate, good destiny, good luck. And the Washington Post posted an ad in the Post that there was going to be a course at the Mayflower Hotel one day, Saturday, for women, how to start your own business at home. There it was in the Washington.
Yeah, it's serendipity, right?
Yes,
everything aligned. Yep.
Yes, it was in the front row. And I wrote down everything they said, and I then went home and proceeded to develop my business according to the checklist. Mm-hmm. Get a bank, get a name, and I created Language Learning Enterprises. And its purpose was to teach language, foreign language, to adults. And I figured out fairly early that the US government would be my best client. And in those days, you could just walk into the Pentagon, go down the hall to the contracting officer and say, you guys buy language services? And of course they did, as did State Department, as did Foreign Agriculture. There was all sorts of clients right there for me to chase down. And I had a master's degree in 16th century French literature. I knew how to read, how to research, how to think, and how to write a good answer to a proposal, request for proposal. Just do it. And so soon, within a couple of years, I started, winning contracts, government contracts. And I needed classrooms. That was a little tricky because I was operating out of my home. But I figured out that the place to go would be to the churches closest to the White House. And the famous one is St. John's, and that's the one I chose. And I talked to the parish pastor, and I said, what do you do with your Sunday school classrooms, Monday through Friday? Nothing. I said, could I rent them? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about, lady. You must be crazy. So I said, no, I have these students and they're adults and they're studying languages and they're very quiet. And we just need the rooms, from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So he showed me and he leased me all 6. So I then was able to really go for the big time contracts. And then I just had to convince the contracting officers and the financial people that I wasn't crazy, that I would get bigger chairs and higher tables, mm-hmm. and maybe take down some of the pictures of Jesus. And there were my classrooms. And so from there, the company grew very quickly over the years, and we moved into translation, and we moved into interpretation, and then we moved into the most brilliant thing of all, which was access to interpreters over the telephone. And this is getting now into the period where I'm beginning to have a relationship with you. We've got this LLE link. It's well underway. It's competing with the language line over in the West Coast and giving them a little bit of a run for their money. And I was learning about language access and how important it was, and how important having professionals work. It was just burned into me that you just didn't walk in and become an interpreter or a translator or an instructor, that all of the lines of services that I was beginning to understand were part of an industry required professionals. And it became my passion. We just had to put all of the things in place to have the professionalism, which includes what? Standards, certifications, credentials, recognition, all of those good things. So that's the short answer.
That's, it's a short answer. I know that. I know there's so many more things that you omitted, but I wanted actually to continue this conversation about being a professional and also ask you to tell us how did you realize that you're the ones who can actually help define those standards, and what your role was with the ILR standards, because that's an important piece that some of us kind of think that they've been there forever, and that interagency language roundtable was miraculously forever there. So tell us about that a little bit.
As I say, Natalya, you know me way too well. Well, it all comes back, I think, to something about the way we are. Yes, I was an entrepreneur, but I also was still an academic in my thinking. And in starting to work with the government and providing them with instructors and translators and interpreters, and we were right away working with languages that I had never even heard of. I mean, you could have told me Telugu and I would not, or Talag, or even, things like Pashto and Dari that became so much in need. These were languages that I didn't know, didn't understand, and how am I going to hire people to work for? So I became aware of this interagency language roundtable. And at the time, it was reserved only to government agencies. But because we were contracting for, and Karen Decker, you met her, her path is similar. So we were filling a hole for the government. If the government didn't have Pashto right now, we did. And so we were training these people to go over and use their languages either on the battlefield or in all sorts of different ways. And so we said, look, it would be nice if you would allow us commercial language schools to join these meetings. Oh, okay. So they allowed us to join. And then once that happened, I just began making amazing contacts and networks with incredible people like Maria Brau at the FBI. She was my mentor because she knew what it took to be a translator, for example. And so she invited me. She said, would you like to work on the committees? And I said, sure, absolutely. So I began to be a part of the actual drafting of the skill level descriptions. Because at this point we needed to be able to show it in writing to people what we were talking about. It couldn't just be in our heads, So she and several, amazing people. It was an exciting time. This would have been the late 80s, 90s.
I was just going to say that was probably end of 80s.
Exactly. And just beginning to be a time when language services were starting to be recognized as a thing, if you will. I hate that expression. But anyway, we were, and then we kept writing them. So we needed them for translation. We needed them for interpreting. We needed them for testing. And then we needed them for performance. So we can show you what we think an interpreter needs to have at a language level proficiency. But what about performing?
Yep.
Those were really hard to do because it's like a great interpreter when you see her or him, but how do you describe it? How do you quantify it? So that was a great period of time. And that segued in so beautifully for me professionally to help outside of government to be a part of this wonderful organization, CCHI, and of course, ASTM, the creating of the standards. So it's been a lovely, lovely journey and very consistent with my values and my passions.
And also that I know brought you in contact with the language access activists.
Yes.
And that's how you met Mara Udelman, who just started in the early 2000s. And as you know, that she, her, and we later on witnessed all this path to what now is, climaxing in the new revised rule on Section 1557 regarding non-discrimination in healthcare. So let's talk about this for a little bit. How that was for you? How what you learned from it, and what kind of revelations you hope to share with us? Yeah.
Well, I'm delighted to do this because it's making me just have these wonderful memories. So it was like you say, that it was that period of time, late 80s, early 90s. And I was very fortunate to be in the private sector. But I came to know Mara, and she had these wonderful tables that she put together, and we would have discussions. And it was a coalition, she called it. Mm-hmm. And it was like people in healthcare, and it was, associations like La Raza. And then there was me representing the for-profit group. And, yes. and I was so comfortable there because I felt that we added to the work that was being done. And so just hold that thought just for a minute, because it'll parallel with something that I think you're going to want me to talk about anyway, and it fits in here nicely. At the same time that I was growing and developing in the language services industry, I was also growing and developing as a woman business owner in direct parallel. Mm-hmm. And there were very few women business owners, or maybe not even any, that were in a language services industry in quite the way that I was. And so I was able to grow and to develop in that field by becoming active on their boards. Mm-hmm. And this would be my message to our audiences, is that if you join, then you need to participate. Don't just join and do.
That's right. Yes, that's what I always value, and that we can learn by doing, and we can grow by doing, and we make change happen by doing. And so all these things that we see in policy that took you, Mara, and other early pioneers 20 years to get to where we're at now, but they're still happening. And the thing is that you need to continue showing up and keep doing it. As soon as you stop, you're pushed off down the agenda, and something else comes up, and your values and your causes and achievements lose value. So it's important to show up and continue doing it. And that kind of is a good segue to talk about, what do you see for us to do now? What do you see our challenges as, or solutions that we should do?
Before I go to the future, I want to make this other very important parallel. So in my work as a woman business owner, I joined an organization called NABO, the National Association of Women Business Owners. And at that time, women were just simply not recognized in government contracting in so many ways. So I was invited to be a part of the teams that worked on what became HR 5050. And HR 5050 is the Women's Business Ownership Act. So that was my beginning.
Wow.
So when Mara came along, I was ready.
That's right.
I had gone on the Hill. I had testified. I'd helped write testimony. I had helped organize all of the behind the scenes work that it took. And there were incredible women in my life, just incredible women. And HR 5050 is still on the books. It was signed into law, and it still stands. Mm-hmm. So that was a big achievement. So when Mara came along and we had what we have today, I felt so comfortable. I was ready to, do ALC on the Hill and go up and testify and help her in her coalition, and moving from the coalition into the more organized structures that we have today. So where do we go? Where do we go? It feels to me that we have such opportunity right now to take these strong bases, this foundation that we have, and just explode it with marketing, education, getting out of our closets and saying, here we are. We are a language services industry. We are professionals, and language access is critical to our society. And that's what we have to do now, because the foundation is here. Now we got to put the even more, even the bricks are here. We need to put on the nice facade.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Because I think, during my career, this last 22 years, we've been talking about like how we need to be treated as equal with the with the healthcare providers in the healthcare field. We're beyond that. We are equal. We have all the elements demonstrating that we are a serious profession, a serious industry, because the profession without the industry is powerless. You need to show to lawmakers and to recipients of your services, the beneficiaries, that it is a strong foundation, not collapsing tomorrow, right? And that's why we have all the elements. We have all the elements of the definition of our profession, the standards, the code of ethics, the certification pass for all interpreters, because that's what, of course, I'm tooting my own horn, but that's what CCHI offers. And that's what you were part of from the very beginning. Absolutely. We were trying to create something that touches everybody. It's not just for Spanish. It's not just the top 15 languages, but for everybody. And that's the path we have.
Exactly, exactly. So if we use the architectural image, we have our church. Now what we need are the spires and all the decorations, the stainless glass windows that people can see.
That's right.
We need to be seen.
Yes. And that's why it's so important to participate in different kinds of advocacy on behalf of the profession, including what we all just did by submitting comments on Section 1557 new rule, but also events like what you mentioned, ALC on the Hill. Just one sentence, what is it? Tell us more about that, because I know we as CCHI participate in it, but I'm not sure if our audience really is aware of what that is.
Well, in the last couple of years, the ALC, which is the Association of Language Companies, has engaged the professional services of Bill Rivers, Dr. Bill Rivers, and he is performing amazing functions for us in lobbying and in working with people like Mara and others across the country in these state issues, but mostly on the federal level. And once a year, we all are invited to come up to Capitol Hill and to meet with our congressman and to say, here we are. We are the people of the language services industry. We are the people that are here to tell you that we need you to pay attention and to pass this legislation and to get this done. And we do it once a year, but then all year long, we're in contact so that Bill can get information, keep them when things are coming down that they have to look at the legislators, then they can make decisions. And, again, I'm still new here, Natalya. I really don't know American politics and all these little ins and outs, but I know that's a good thing, what we're doing. Advocating and lobbying and talking to congressmen and all of that stuff. And I have great colleagues who guide us and take us and make sure that we're in the right place. But that's what it is. And we call it affectionately ALC on the Hill once a year. And you'll be hearing about it. It's going to be in March 23rd, 25 in 2023. Please.
Wonderful. Yes, we look forward to that. Last year was a blast. Yeah. For some states, it's more blast than for others. Let me tell you that, because I was representing the state of Ohio, and I was the only one. So it was like all attention was on me. I had the opportunity to talk about multiple issues that interpreters and professions and the companies are experiencing. Of course, if you are in the larger groups like California, maybe, or Texas, you may not be having this much time, but collectively as a group, this is our chance to speak to people who write things as drafts. And that's the most important thing. If our name is on the draft of something, then it's already there. Of course, there's more things to do, but that's an important, because if we're not even in the draft, or if nobody knows us, we already missed out the opportunity.
Exactly.
And speaking of education that you see as our future, I know there are very many different ways, and we at CCHI do our share of educating the providers through the National Language Access Leadership Huddle. But I know also of the initiative, because I was part of it, the ALC Bridge. So tell us what that is. What are you bridging? You're architect of our future. What are you bridging?
Oh, thank you. You've given me my new title. That's very good. Very good. So what we discovered, this goes back to my academic years, and you had asked me to perhaps speak a little bit about scholarships and such. Once I began being, successful with this language company, I wanted to give back, and I wanted to prepare the future generation to think of more than just teaching. It's not that teaching isn't needed, it's just that there is more than just teaching. And I wanted the students to see this. So I endowed a scholarship at the University of Florida. And I also endowed a scholarship with the IES abroad, which is where I did my year abroad in France. But what I saw was that there was resistance, Natalya. I can't even say that it was subtle. Mm-hmm. There were people in the back of the room, tisking, she doesn't have her PhD, she's not teaching, she's just making money. And what is she telling the students? And so I saw there was resistance within the faculties, the traditional thinking of this is what a language department does. It teaches theory, literature, whatever, but it doesn't teach practice. And so I just kind of sat on that. Sometimes, you get insights, but you don't act because there isn't a way to go. And so several years later, in attending an ALC retreat, I was in a small breakout room with some representatives of language companies. Luckily for me, all the range. Scott Klein from Language Line was in the room, along with Doug Strock from his company, small, large, medium-sized companies. And they all came around and said, our biggest challenge right now is lack of talent, language talent in our pipelines. And I'm listening, I'm thinking, that means that they're going to have trouble hiring what we know they're going to be needing, because we see the demand. There's been this fabulous rise in demand for our services, but we're still at the language departments teaching like it was, when I was in school.
That's right. One of my mid-level thesis was on existentialism and Iris Murdoch novels and Jean-Paul Sartre. So,
Mon Dieu, ma chère.
I know. What does it have to do with me doing healthcare interpreting, right? So, because I loved it, I loved writing it, but then I understood I cannot do all my life that.
Yeah.
My other thesis was the impact of interjections on communicative intent. Oh, there's exactly that. Oops, oh, ouch, what do they mean in the conversation? Again, fascinating, but that's not something that I thought I could do the impact and change the world to be a better place. And so while interpreting and translation and language services, managing and testing, all that is already impacting somebody else, not just showing, how knowledgeable I am about this wonderful but obscure esoteric things.
Exactly. So what happened is that the conversation continued, and somehow I must have said, well, we really do need to speak to the academics who are preparing the workforce of the future, because we have the workforce of now needs, and okay, fine. Kathleen, what are you going to do about it? By this time in my life, I was kind of used to this question.
I know. You posed the question. That means you're interested. What are you going to give us? That's right. What are you going to create?
So I sat on it for a bit, but not too long. And I decided that I needed to form a committee. And I needed to have a committee made up of language companies and language academics. And I needed to have them talking to see how we were going to get to bridge the gap to be able to prepare the students for the jobs that we have. And we launched in 2019, and with our website, alcbridge.org. And then the pandemic hit within 4 months thereafter. So we used that time actually very well to do things like we're doing right now. We began having Zoom meetings, and we began talking to, you know, the Carnegie Mellons, the Rutgers at Newark, the NYUs, the universities that were offering language programs, who were seeing that they needed to make some changes because there were no people enrolling, and were looking for something like us. And they found us. And so the last 3 years of it has been so fantastic in building these relationships where we will change the curriculum slightly to adjust so they include translation, interpretation in their training and in their degrees and diplomas. And more importantly, that they know where to come for internships and for jobs. And so this is all real time. This is happening right now. I'll be launching, when I say I, I'm referring to the Royal I of ALC Bridge. We will be launching a campaign to work with a set group of companies and a set group of academics that pledge to post internships and have students come to find internships. So we can get that balance on the website. Because right now it's in an imbalance, you know, there's somebody posts and there's no answers because nobody knows about it.
That's right. Well, and that takes time, right? The process started and it will lead you where it needs to lead you. But this is an exciting time to be in the middle of it because, you know, many of people who are listening to us today, they've missed the opportunity of being with you at ILR or at other, you know, ASTM or CCHI, other endeavors. Although CCHI, you can always join our board. Please do. That's right. Or become our subject matter expert. But this is an opportunity for somebody to, you know, be part and know that this is in the making and join efforts and do help you and the academics and the students who would be our future language company owners, directors of testing, of training companies. So that's a definitely important thing. But let's talk about some fun stuff.
So it's www.alcbridge.org. Couldn't be easier. It is a separate platform, separate web, separate URL from ALC.
That's right, because it is a bridge, so it needs to be accessible for both.
Exactly.
Yep.
And right now there's no charge. Academics can come in, students can come in, and of course language companies, anybody that wants to engage you know, talent can come in. So you're right, this is what are we doing now? We're still trying to become visible.
That's right. Yes. And, you know, right now, visibility on the web, visibility on social media is part of it, right? No matter how much we may not like it, but this is reality. And we use all tools that, you know, help us move our mission forward and our vision forward. So, well, let's talk about some fun things. You know, one thing I mean, everybody already heard like many things already, but I was, you know, fully flawed and impressed when I learned that you were the businesswoman who introduced French wines to your local market. I mean, I was like, wow, wow, what other things could you do? So tell me just maybe briefly about that. And other enterprises that, you know, are not in the language field.
Okay, well, first of all, we have to make sure that we make for the record that I didn't introduce all French wines to the market. Because then I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd probably be sitting in some chateau somewhere, Natalya, drinking my wine. But what I did, and it was all 100% related to the language, my language work. I, in the process of building LLE, I continued working with a group of seniors, senior women primarily, at the Campagna Center in Alexandria. This was a place that had been a YWCA, and it left that institution and created its own center. And they worked mainly with children, Head Start, and disabled, not disabled, but people with fewer opportunities in the city of Alexandria. But they had this group of women, older women, who were their matrons. I mean, they provided funding and, hosted parties and did stuff that, women did that out there. And so I was invited to come in because, we heard that you're a French teacher and these people are looking for some French. So I went and I started working in 1977 with these women every Wednesday. And this group of people stayed with me. Well, some of them died, some of them came in. I mean, there was a little bit of volatility, but mainly there was a consistency every Wednesday from 1977 to 2007.
Wow.
It was an incredible journey, and it ended with all sorts of amazing publicity and great things. But what happened was these were very wise women. And they said, we've been noticing that there's all sorts of programs that take kids to Europe for 2 weeks in the summer. Who's taken us?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah.
putting a pattern in my life here.
Yeah.
People ask questions and look at me, right? So I said, well, I don't know. They said, well, we're your students and we'd like to go to France and we'd like to have a 2-week immersion and we'll go with you. So I organized a little travel agency, and I began to work with these students. And every other year during that long period of time, I took students to France. But the pact I made with them was I had to go somewhere different every time, because otherwise it'd be boring for me. Mm-hmm. And I had to be, continue to be working and doing my day job, which was my company. So we did this. And in so doing, I became very good friends with a chef and owner of a hotel in a small town called Sarlat. And he was very fascinated by me and my students. We stayed 2 weeks in his hotel,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I've been interested in maybe exporting some wine to the United States. Maybe you could, you could import it. And I'm going, oh, sure. Wait till I tell my family this. But over the years, in the early 80s, it all made sense. It made sense because I had the product. It was in the part of France that I love and knew so well, Dordogne. And so these were wines, the Cahors wines, the Bergerac wines, the Gaillacs. These were small wines that just weren't on the market. So there was no competition with the Bordeaux and the Burgundies and all that stuff. So I said, okay, we'll try, we'll do it. And it was such an eye-opener because it took me out of the genteel language world and put me on the ports of Baltimore with the stevedores and the people say, oh, the broad's here again. She wants their wine. Absolutely so green and so not them. But I pulled together a little team. I had a good friend who was willing to do some finance for me. I had somebody else who was willing to do some contracting. And then, of course, there was myself and my friend Philippe in France. And we put together D&M Spirits. And we ran it and we did well. But it came to a point in the mid-'80s where decisions had to be made. Mm-hmm. He had his hotel, I had LLE, my other two friends had their businesses. And we were either going to have to go big time, meaning trucks, warehouses, big time insurance, or we would see if we could sell the company. And we sold the company.
Yeah. And I'm forever grateful because otherwise you wouldn't have had time for us. You wouldn't have went on to do all the other things that you did. But, I also know that your business spirit didn't stop there. Tell us about the latest one, about the bank. And then.
Okay. We'll, and we must be running out of time.
That's right. We're getting there. But I just want people to see what you could do if you really are passionate, excited. And if you are Kathleen Diamond.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, dear Natalya. You're good for me because you get me, you get me to talk. And I think maybe it's important for me to confess that along this way of this entrepreneurship path, I was tested many, many times. And, I am an introvert. I am an introvert. And it causes many people to not believe, but I am. But what I've learned to do is I've learned to prepare for this kind of, and this is easy for me because this is just us. But if I'm going to go out and be on stage or whatever the extroverts do, I can do it. It's just that it exhausts me. Mm-hmm. It's just exhausting for me. So I'll end with that insight into who I am, because it's sort of important for people to understand that I'm not one of these, I'm not searching a bigger, larger audience. I'm not. I prefer to be just here, and then I'll work the audience when it's time. So again, it's connected to language. I was attending a conference, an ALC conference, and there was a gentleman from the outside world present. And we met up at one of the receptions, and we got to talking, and somehow we discovered that we had Alexandria, Virginia in common. And, again, how these things happen. So we got to talking, and I said, well, it's where I was. I spent many years in Alexandria, and I still bank at Burke and Herbert Bank. And he looked at me and he said, really? I said, yep. I bank at Burke and Herbert Bank. It's my small bank, just my main bank. That's where I go, I keep that. It's allegiance and loyalty. They were the first company to provide my company, my first loan. Oh, he says, well, he says, have you ever thought of being on their board? I'm having a coffee. No, I was having a drink with this guy. This was at the reception. No, I think I met him first at a coffee, because then he said to me, let's talk tonight when we were at the reception. So I'm thinking, this is just talk, nothing will come of it. Well, at the reception, he closed the sale, basically. And he said, I am not only on the board, but I'm also on the search committee. And
I found you.
I want to put your name forward. So I was elected to be on the board of Burke and Herbert Bank and Trust in Alexandria, Virginia. It was founded in 1852, and I was only the 5th woman to serve on their board.
Wow. That still is unbelievable, but I'm so glad that you did, because that is just, we need to be there, because that's how we make ourselves seen. And that's how I'm sure you did talk about the language with them at some point, because it is being visible as us doing different things. That's what very important. Yeah,
absolutely. And Natalya, even at my age, I still had so much learning to do. And it was very hard. I was so far out of my comfort zone, because nobody knew me the way you know me.
That's right.
ALC members know me. My world, my comfort level is very comfortable because I've been in it for so long. And here I'm going to these meetings and I'm just sitting there like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared. But it was great. It was a great experience. And I termed out this last June, and I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the amount of time I served and how much I learned, and hopefully how much I contributed to them. And I still bank there.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. No, Kathleen, thank you. I know you and I can talk for another hour. Oh, yeah. I know that easily, but I think I want to still leave people with the mystery of you, because, we touched main things that were of interest to me and I knew, but there are many more that we haven't talked about. So I hope that we'll have other opportunities in the future, but I am tremendously grateful on behalf of CCHI and all of people who will watch this, that you shared with us part of your life, part of your passion, and help us see what we can do now. So we'll join you in educating everybody about language services, the interpreting profession, translating profession, and all other things that relate to language. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, my dear Natalya. Join and do.
We will. We shall.
Thank you.